with the microphone with Restream again. Isn't that exciting? Anyway, behold our hard to read list of people who have helped the program going through Patreon. Every one of you is extremely important, and I could not do it without you, literally. So we're continuing with our exciting run through the source analysis of Nathaniel Jeanson's 2021 book, Traced, where he gets the secret history of life, human beings, by compressing all the genetic data from a relatively few sources into a post-flood context. Last week, we dealt with his wacky Walam Olam stuff, and he continues on for the next few pages going on with that material until finally we hit the next of his source material. Just in case we do get a burp in our connections, I'll also discuss the part 2 of the show, which relates to the Answers in Genesis jihad, which is their absolute detestation of evolutionary creationists. In other words, creationists who pay too much attention to reality. One of the posts in this series is an attack on Todd Wood, transitional fossils, and we'll actually be going into that in the new Rocks for Their book, because he's blathering on about Tiktaalik and also whales, which is going to be a discussion, not the country, but the little swimmy creatures. But along the way in here, it had a little golden oldie quote mining from Raup and Patterson, traditional ones, and if you've read the previous books, you'll know all about how that's been misused by creationists. And he hits a little bit that Ernst Mayr wrote in his 2000 book, What Evolution Is, quote, that the fossil record of the earliest plants is very poor. Fossils of mosses, generally considered the most primitive of the living land plants, have been found from the Devonian period, but surely they existed earlier and did not fossilize, unquote. Which, of course, is a dead giveaway for the creationists that, oh, no, they are not there because the earth is not old, etc., etc. But the problem is as fine as Ernst Mayr is, a general summary from 2001 is hardly a substitute for the technical literature that Answers in Genesis didn't even bother to cite. So let's go into a little bit of that part. I will be putting up a link to Taylor and Taylor 2012 on what was known about Paleozoic mosses, which is sparse, and then another 2012 paper from Hubers and Kerp, who described the oldest unequivocal Carboniferous mosses. Now, mosses are quite early branches in plant phylogeny, and the wee little mosses, oddly enough, did not take over the planet. And there's a paper from 2015 by Shelton that I'll be putting a link to, which noted how there were only less than 10 genera of mosses known from the Cretaceous. In other words, they are little niche critters. The other plants that evolved later just went berserk, had a wonderful time colonizing things. Mosses have a little bit iffier operation. To put the whole land plant evolution in perspective and how the mosses fit into that, there's a 2018 paper by Morris, and more recently still, Ignatov and Maslova, 2021, reviewing the moss fossil record. So it got a complete compendium on there, which can be compared to the vacuous material as presented by the creationists. And it's the interesting bits is that the earliest are extremely sparse and hard to classify compared to current ones. Kind of like there had been some evolution on them since then. So that's why they're hard to classify. They're a little bit of this, a little bit of that, almost this, almost that. As for the preservation issue, the Ignatov paper noted, quote, that amber inclusions known from Eocene and Cretaceous remain the main mode of moss preservation in the period from Carboniferous to Eocene. 101 out of 226 records just from amber, which means that without that sap, which didn't come onto the scene really until the Mesozoic in full measure, the odds are against the flimsy little moss making it into the fossil record, which of course was Ernst Mayr's point. So in every possible direction of leaving out relevant information, not paying attention to more recent information, and offering, of course, no systematics as to how many baramins of moss there are. Are they a baramin? Are they a member of something else? Who knows? The creationists make no venture to this, and they don't even have anybody to cite in this matter. It's a complete non-starter. So that's the exciting little part 2 material. Now we'll go back to part 1 and good old Jeanson. His arguments about genetics and bringing in this Poznik paper, which I'll be putting a link to, and also a link to the general abstract of it, because from there you can get to the supplementary information, which is the little nugget that Jeanson is trying to make hay of. At no point does he discuss the Poznik paper, at least so far. There's another Poznik paper from 2013 that's in his references. Haven't encountered it yet. So whether or not he ever comes back into this data field, we'll find out. Not holding my breath. But anyway, all he's bringing it on the field for is to reference a claim, quote, mainstream genetics is so dependent on the archaeological narrative that mainstream geneticists use archaeological dates as a literal, quote, sanity check, unquote. And this was referenced to the Poznik paper, page 87 of the supplementary notes. And he got this little nugget from Rob Carter, a fellow creationist geneticist. Now, the funky part is that Carter is one of the creationist geneticists that is dumped on Traced the book as being very inadequate. So, ironically, that isn't going to help him much. But what's more interesting as a clue to the weird mind of Robert Carter and the superficial secondary source citation of Jeanson is what happens when you look into that supplementary information, page 87, to see what's actually there. And so it turns out that the sanity check quote snippet was not relating to archaeological data. It was on more genetic data, which they were using as a, quote, sanity check by looking at a different set of genes that they were connecting up to cross-reference to see how far those things were in terms of splits, and that would be a way of calibrating the other stuff to make sure that their stuff was properly calibrated and therefore a sanity check on it. Now, it's not that they shouldn't pay attention to archaeology. Indeed, they should do that. And maybe one of these days, Jeanson or Rob Carter may start paying attention to archaeology. I'm not really holding my breath on that one, but we'll see. This I thought was so fascinating because why either Jeanson never looked close enough at the quote to realize that the quote is not about archaeological data, or he does realize that and he doesn't care. I don't know. My preference, seeing his interactions with Dan Stern Cardinale, would be that he didn't think to look, that he got this little blip from Carter, who misunderstood what he was seeing, burrowing through the supplementary information to try to get this little glib bit out of it, and that passed it on to Jeanson, who then incorporated it willy-nilly into a little footnote in his book. Now, we are still plowing along awfully far into Jeanson's book. Page after page, we're past the midsection where there were all these little color plates, and he's barely even tiptoed into the technical citations that are in his reference bibliography. So every week now, I've just been waiting with bated breath to see when is he going to cite all of this stuff, in what context. Now, I'm crossing my fingers because I haven't glanced ahead to find out exactly what's going on in this area. I like to keep myself in suspense. But my suspicion, based on the structure of his previous book, is that he's going to wait to dump all of this on us in a concluding chapter where he's pulling all the threads of the argument together into one fell swoop. We'll see. But it's going to have to be an awfully barrage of technical citations. Now, in the previous book, though, that pulling together part didn't actually bring in new information. It simply reprised the argument that he was being presented, that he presented in the earlier chapters. So it's an odd inversion to be presenting a poorly documented argument for chapter after chapter after chapter, including the Walla Molam, and then dumping this material on, will he be making a full case for it, or will it be a matter of him sprinkling these little things in much the same way he's doing with this other one? By the way, the Poznik paper is really quite an interesting one because it pops up. There's an explicit reference to this Yamnaya people who were thought to have kind of gone extinct. They're showing up in the genetics in a lot of areas in Eurasia, and then they kind of drop off the map. Turns out that a little remnant of that genetic cohort is alive today in Asia. And there was a paper on that when we're going to be discussing all of that in Rocks Were There Volume 2, where as the Poznik paper comes up in relation to all this other stuff, whoops, what the hell? I suddenly got a black screen. Okay. The argument is going to be really interesting to see how he's going to connect up on that stuff. The technical literature that Jeanson keeps citing and misrepresenting, now we've got 9 papers that I'm contending he's misrepresenting, and a tiny 3 or 4 that he manages not to misrepresent because they're offering, hello, Barbara, patron. I'll give a little reprise here since you just jumped in. I'll be having links to some stuff on mosses and plant phylogeny, because an Answers in Genesis a jihad on the evolutionary creationists that is not really about mosses per se, but along the way an authority quote gets dropped. And given the fact that he's culling it from an old 2001, perfectly fine 2001 book, Ernst Mayer's book on evolution, but it was a general work. It wasn't a textbook, and it wasn't a technical literature, and it's also decades old. And so the fun part is that it didn't take me very long to cull a substantial amount of information that directly related to not only what the fossil record of mosses are and how difficult they are to fossilize and the distribution of them, but also how they fit in and how early stages are being observed in the earliest versions and so forth of what we do find. And anybody that wants to can therefore look at the pile of papers that I'll be offering and compare that to the vacuous nothing that's happening over in AiG land. The main section in that paper was in relation to whales and Tiktaalik, and both of those are going to be major topics in volume 2 of Rocks Were There. So we'll be pulling all of that material in there. It's a juicy little subject. And speaking of thinking of whales, I still have not seen hide nor hair of that promised paper that Gunter Beckley was intending to do with Hossier and others on whale evolution, that was going to blow the lid off the argument that they could ever have evolved. And he was promising this several years ago to Erica, aka Gutsick Gibbon, and I haven't seen diddly squat on it. Now, if anybody has seen this thing pop up somewhere, I'm assuming in actually the implication was that it was not going to be appearing in Biocomplexity, that would be appearing in a mainstream journal somewhere, one of these little decorator journals that you basically pay to play, that you can get stuff published in. But still haven't seen it yet. And the reason why I'd love to see it, he was supposed to send an advance copy to Erica, and I haven't heard her comment on that either. So what has happened to the little thing? Did it not pass the peer review of whatever journal they were dealing with? I don't know. But the reason why I'm so anxious to see an actual technical paper on it, even if they stuck it in Biocomplexity, fine and dandy, is that at least you'd be able to see their sources, and you'd be able to see what points they're making and what sources they're offering for them, and get some clarity out of it. I've been waiting for that to happen with von Sternberg, the little guy that was involved in that Smithsonian flap that allowed Stephen Meyer to slip a little paper on the Cambrian explosion into this little systematics journal, which it really was the wrong place for it anyway. But the thing is that Sternberg has done quite a few videos over the past decade where he asserts that whales cannot evolve and alludes to stuff, but there's no technical literature being cited. It's just a video that pops up and gets repeated at Discovery Institute and all of that. Yet to see a work on the subject. So if any of that does materialize prior to the appearance of Volume 2 Rocks Were There, rest assured we will be including it in the material, or alluding to the fact that as of the publication date of the new book, it still ain't out. So there we go. So that gets that up to speed. And what I discussed on Jeanson related to this Poznik paper that I'll be putting a link up to. I didn't put the link to the 2013 paper. When we get down to the point when Jeanson actually cites it, I'll be sticking that up, because it should be pretty much open access. But the thing is that here was a technical paper, an excellent technical paper, whose content Jeanson does not discuss. and makes a point about it in relation to the relationship of archaeology to genetic data, that when you looked at the actual source that he cited, that he got from Rob Carter secondarily, doesn't actually say what Rob Carter insisted it did. Why am I not surprised? So that's kind of the whole show on here. I think that covers it for the bit. We're coming into a heat wave at the moment in Spokane, so it's kind of nice to stay up late at night and let the house cool down and all that. And I got the rest of the lawn mowed today, so that at least I won't have to worry about that and just bother getting the water on the lawn so that it won't be burned to a crisp. And apparently it's going to be as hot as Hades in Seattle, which is going to be fun and games for all the people that are not used to extremely high heat in Seattle, including my niece and her family and her little the Montessori school she runs and all that. So it's going to be a funky time all around. And I've also been completing up some little sidebars on my Politique game that I mentioned quite a few episodes back, that I found out that it was possible to do a mock-up version of that will be much more professional. And later on, hopefully later on this year or next year, I'll be actually doing a little thing on that. And I've been tinkering around with being able to get the little game cards and little mini maps on the game cards and figuring out how to structure logos for the front that I can use as a JPG and print up on stuff and all the kinds of things that would have been exceedingly difficult the last time I did a mock-up of the earlier version of the game, which is in the 1980s. So it was a long time ago. Anyway, it benefited a great deal from the play testing that Dapper Dino and Colton and all the rest of us did when we were down on our Grand Canyon adventure a couple of years ago down in Arizona. And they're all game people. And so they gave a little bit and suggested some improvements that I could do to the game. And I took those improvements and added some additional improvements so that I think it's turning into an even nicer thing. And what I plan to do then locally is there are a bunch of little gamers knocking around via Merlin's and Uncle's bookstore or game store. And then there's a hobby town up at North Point that has gamers that come in every once in a while. And anyway, I'll be contacting them once I have the mock-up constructed, because I want to get some play testing on the new version of the game where it would be done properly cold. I would not be playing it with them. I would just be having them open the box up, lay everything out, read the startup card. How long does it take to get the thing organized? Or do they enjoy the game? Would anyone want to buy it? And at what price point? I'd be asking the people there to figure out what kind of thing and what would be a good price point for that kind of stuff. And then it'll probably hit a brick wall, because at that point, from what I've done for preliminary checking, the price per unit for a game to get it down to maybe the $80 level would still involve quite a lot of capital. And so I'm not holding my breath on that one, but at least I'll have a much better design. I added on these little polar regions where the sections of the seas freeze up half of the year, and added on some extra ocean hexes, which I couldn't do in the older version of the game because I had to put it on a smaller board that didn't have space for all of that. So I was able to enlarge the board a little bit more like the original version that was made back in the 1970s. So anyway, that's my little side rhapsody on the Politique war game, and I'll probably do a shameless plug on it once I have the whole box and all the components done up. I have to assemble the board kind of like a jigsaw puzzle from various little grids that I'll be sticking together because I don't have access to the kinds of programs that typically would be used to generate an entire board graphically. And plus, I don't have the skill set in terms of graphic design to pull it off. But I can get enough of the details so that it's straightforward enough for my purposes to be able to look better than the all hand drawn directly onto the board bit that I had to do 40 years ago. So that will be the little bit sidebar on that. And then, of course, I'm continuing to work on the third book in the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg series. I'll give a little teaser in the sketches that I'm at the moment. Aouda and Passepartout and Phileas Fogg are down on Lincoln Island, which is Captain Nemo, her brother, by the way, and therefore Fogg's brother-in-law in my alternate storyline, where Aouda is building her own little version of Thomasina Maker's flyer. And her little thing, she wants to have quieter engines and get as much speed as Maker has. And so needed a place where she could have the engines blast away down there. And it turns out the island down there, which is 1,000 miles from anywhere, turns out to be quite satisfactory for that. So there's a little mini vacation where they're spending time down in the fictitious Lincoln Island that figures in the Mysterious Island novel of Jules Verne. So why am I getting, the screen gets black because of that doesn't happen typically. The thing keeps active. I don't know. Foibles with the computer. It's very awkward. So anyway, we got a good 20 minutes in. Everybody take care. Watch out for the heat if you're in an area that's in that. If you're in a part of the place where there's people shooting at you, obviously be very careful there. I know there's one person that I connected up with earlier in some potential marketing things for the TIP project and that lives in Ukraine. And so I haven't heard from him in quite a while for obvious reasons, because I'm sure everything has gotten far more important things for them to do than chit-chatting and squibbling on potential website adjustments here. But anyway, a lot of little projects and stuff going afoot. And we'll all see you next week with the next installment of Jeanson, where someday, I hope, we will actually find out. Oh, it would be hilarious if it turns out that Jeanson doesn't actually end up citing everything in his reference bibliography. That would be a level of padding incompetence that, frankly, I would be surprised if Jeanson did that. If he went to all the trouble of sticking a relatively small number of sources into a reference bibliography and then ended up not even using all of them, wow, that's going to be funky. I was hoping that there would be references to the little illustrations in his color plates and that, which is typical for the way you would do things. If you were using a technical citation for a particular plate, you'd want people to see it so they could locate the information, unless you're a creationist, in which case you don't want them to do that. So yes, hating climate change. Well, our region is probably better off than most. We do have the little temperature fluctuations, which means typically less snowfall in town than in decades past, bursts of heat occasionally. But the thing that I'm keep on worrying about, and so far seems fairly stable, is the whole watershed that feeds the Columbia River down through Canada and then to the United States seems to be fairly stable. So there doesn't seem to be a serious water drainage problem since we rely on it so much for irrigation and all of that. Unlike the Colorado River, which is getting down to be bone dry, and to the point of where the lake behind Glen Canyon Dam is possibly going to disappear completely at the rate they're going, and they'll have to simply let the water build up at Lake Mead that's next to Hoover Dam. So a very different dynamic there. Or if you're on the Mississippi or some of these other rivers that go into super duper flood stage because of all the extra rain that's hitting them. And so that where the ecosystem simply can't drain fast enough, regardless of what levees they put in. With that condition, I think we're doing pretty well here. We can handle a little bit of hot, and that provided our water system in that stays comfortable. So we'll see how that works out for years to come. Anyway, everybody take care, except no wooden penguins. Unless they're exceptionally well-dressed wooden penguins. I mean, I'm beginning to think that maybe I should let a little teeny leeway for sartorially splendiferous wooden penguins. But those are relatively few and far between. I mean, they seem to be dedicated to just the tuxedo look, and what else can I say? So anyway, take care, everybody, and we will see you next week when it will be even hotter than it is today.